Welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Transcend and Succeed show. I'm your guest host, Megan North, and I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce you to this week's guest, Alice Crawley. She is a visionary at the intersection of addiction, recovery, and storytelling. As a speaker, author, and film producer, the core of Alice's compelling narrative is her grapple with debilitating drug, exercise, and spending addictions, and she's battled mental health and well-being issues, overdoses, and anorexia. In her 2022 book, On the Way to Wonderland, she vividly recounts her transformative experiences, which are both colourful, candid, and at times comical account of bouncing back from decades of nearly fatal conditions. Alice's captivating narrative has not only resonated with readers, but also captured the attention of seasoned film producers who are collaborating to bring her life story to the silver screen. So exciting. Alice is a speaker, and as a speaker, explores the brutal realities of the 21st century addiction landscape, delving into the rise of eating disorders, digital dependencies, and other behavioural addictions that are affecting millions, many without access to treatment. She's changing the conversation on addiction from one of secrecy and shame to one which is honest, healing, and transparent. She's a testament to the power of changing one's destiny through shifting our conscious and unconscious patterns, surrendering to life force, and redefining who we are to live with peace, presence, and purpose. Welcome to the show, Alice. I'm absolutely delighted that you're here with me today.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Megan. I'm really, really excited to be here. I feel very honored and privileged to be invited on the show. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. How does it feel when you hear that introduction? Does it give you reflection every time you hear it to where you've been and where you are now?
It certainly does. Thank you for asking. It really does, because it's been a huge lifelong journey. And I believe that the lifelong journey, it certainly doesn't end. To be honest, sometimes it's a little surreal as well, because publishing my own book and producing a film is something I've wanted from a very early age. So I feel incredibly blessed and grateful to have the opportunity. But as I say, it's very real sometimes, but sometimes it's a bit surreal that it's actually happening. So yeah.
Absolutely. So talking about the book, you've written this amazing book, On the Way to Wonderland. So can you tell the audience what it's about and what made you write the book in the first place?
Yes, of course. Thank you for asking, Megan. This is my book, On the Way to Wonderland, and it's a very open, candid account of the lifelong journey. I would say the first act of my life. I like to think of it as the first act. So kind of the first 50 years. I had planned on releasing a novel, my memoirs earlier than that, but as it happens, that was the right time. And I think I really wanted to write the book for a long time, really to share about the dark comedy that I felt like I was growing up in and that I was living through, because I feel like since a very early age, I always had this dichotomy of being fundamentally quite optimistic, a deeply spiritual person, not religious, but a deep spiritual seeker, which sent me on some pretty amazing journeys around the world through the East and West. But I was always I had very traumatic and troubled upbringing. And I battled with mental health issues, some of them diagnosed earlier in terms of, bipolar, some of them later with respect to ADHD. One of my dilemmas as a storyteller is that I love telling stories because I believe that it's through stories that we can connect, that we can find solace, and that we can heal by sharing these stories. But I also look to find the balance of not getting overly attached to my story or to my diagnoses, really. So I feel like, from a very early age, I'd envisioned writing the story. Honestly, because I grew up with some very, very mad characters in the world that I was living with. And I think it's no coincidence, or maybe part of what prompted me on this path was I was named after Alice in Wonderland. My father was a huge Lewis Carroll fan. And I grew up it was a mad circus. And I know that's not a unique story. Plenty of people out there would consider their families, to be mad environments. But it took me my journey, grappling. I had this very deep curiosity and optimism, was a very strong spiritual seeker and very interested in traveling and exploring other worlds. However, alongside that, I was also dealing with very extreme mood swings, eating disorders from a very, very early age, mental health issues. And in my effort to self-medicate, I found myself going down a very deep, dark rabbit hole in terms of overspending, drug and alcohol addiction. And my rock bottom was when I had a few rock bottoms, but I eventually found myself in 2004 here in Australia, $185,000 in credit card debt, with Interpol wanting to come after me, and sort of found myself with a drug-fueled hangover on Coogee Beach going, how does somebody that's, quite high performing and high achieving find themselves in this place? However, I was able to get myself out of that rabbit hole, and I really wanted to share my story because I believe that we are living in a world where there's a lot of show reels, there's lots of shiny new things, people presenting their outsides, and the reality is that mental health issues and grappling with addictions, spending addictions, debting addictions, drug addictions, it's never something any of us want to put on our CV, but the reality is we find ourselves there if we're not given the right tools and strategies. Mm-hmm. And so so as I say, it's the story of the first act. It does have a happy, uplifting, and inspiring ending. I can say that I was able to pay down the debt in 5 years. And the remarkable part of the journey for me was the going through that recovery and that healing process, recovering from a very, very severe anorexia and nearly dying on many occasions, multiple overdoses, and the financial debting issues that I had with the overspending. It was a portal into a very deep spiritual life for me. And ultimately, it was in aligning to my spiritual self that I found freedom from these anxieties, from the anorexia and the avoidance strategies, as I'd been sort of running from my shadow my whole life. So it isn't all doom and gloom by any means. My intention with my story is to make it fun and funny, because to be honest, that's how I see life. I do see it as a dark comedy. It's not always easy and it can be really challenging, but I also wanted to share my story as a message of hope to people, that no matter how far down the rabbit hole you've gone, it is possible when you surrender, when you reach out for help, and when we're honest about the pain we're in, and can start to, and we have that humility and that ability to reach out for help, we can start to attract extraordinary people and miracles into our experience.
Absolutely. And when you were going through, like when you were at I don't want to say the peak of your addiction, but when you were at the worst part of your addiction and all of the things that you were dealing with, were you one to talk about these things, or were you one to keep them to yourself and to not share and to keep it secret like a lot of people do struggle with?
So that's an excellent question. And I think, I mean, I've always been a big talker. I've always been good at talking, but I think when it came to and part of the very difficult dance, I believe, with addiction and with restrictive eating, with a lot of these process behavioral addictions, there was a lot of lying to myself, which made it impossible to be honest with other people. And so I think it's a great question you ask, because a lot of people that I know that are dealing with, whether that, eating disorders or dealing with drug addictions or other process and behavioral addictions, I think I'd been going to therapy and trained as a therapist, so had decades of exposure to therapy. But the thing that nearly took me down for the count is this insidious connection with delusion and denial that tends to go with the disease of addiction or any restrictive patterns of behaviors, particularly when we're in that really self-destructive and self-harming space, right? So I felt like I would share elements of it, but it really took some time for me to get to the deep dark stuff, the real shadow work. And it wasn't until I was willing to face into that shadow self and really own up to the fact that, hey, I haven't been honest with myself and I need to start being honest with myself and other people, that I began the healing journey and I really started to transform.
Yeah. And I'm writing a research paper at the moment around mental health and well-being, and in a particular industry. And one of the things that I'm talking to senior leaders about is that what's coming through the research is we can all be equipped to help people with mental health, and we can give people ideas and people to contact, and here's a website and those sort of things. But until we are ready to make that change ourselves, then it's a bit like what you said, until we're ready to be honest with ourselves, yes, then we know that all of this stuff is out there. We know that all the help is out there. But until we are ready to actually make that change, then it's difficult for people to be watching, because, and you would know now, I'm sure, with when you see people struggle, it's still their journey. You can be there to support, but it's still their journey.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm really grateful you touched on that, because it's very important to me that I share very openly and transparently about my non-linear recovery, because I do believe that relapse is part of recovery. And in some cases, you can be fully recovered with disordered eating, with drug addictions, with all of these things. I believe that it's a day-to-day proposition, and it's about, finding our path. But I love that you touched on that, because I had an experience end of last year, early this year, it was about being honest with myself. But I think the other thing that's essential to catapult us onto the healing path and to get the help we need, there's a real ego deflation at depth, as it's talked about in recovery, that happens. And so what happened for me is in January, I ended up having to go back into treatment with a relapse of my eating disorder. And I do feel it's important to share openly about this, because I found myself writing about, talking about, working on the film, talking about all the themes, working with all sorts of professionals. And yet I wasn't looking after myself in that regard. And I had, gratefully, people in recovery, professionals around me that had to really hit me between the eyes and say, Alice, you need some medical help with this. And there was a real, it was the denial, but there's a real surrender that goes with that. Particularly when it feels like everything on paper was lining up, everything, in terms of career, work, life success was looking good, but I was still very unwell in that area of my life. And that, to me, it's Yeah, it's a real letting go that needs to happen to kind of go, yeah, okay, I accept I have a problem. And you know what? I may know lots of things in these different areas. I may have worked in this space for decades. I still need some help.
Yeah.
And that really does take a big surrender at depth.
Absolutely. And also courage as well. I know myself in 2014, I was in a very dark space mentally and from a mental health point of view. And I knew, like, I worked in HR, I knew all the help that was around me, but until, again, I was ready to make the change. But it's also having the courage, because when you start to look at what do I need to do to actually turn this around, it's really scary. And I understand why a lot of people don't go down that track, because to get to where we are now, the journey is very hard. But it's having that courage to actually just take it on and actually think something has to be better than where I'm at.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Megan. And that courage, it really can take a huge leap of faith. And it can, and that's where I found myself even in January. I realized that, okay, by and large, a lot of the coping mechanisms that I've used over the years, I've been able to let them go. But it's often when you're left with that last bastion. And for me, it was around what I was doing to, really control. It was around control, around the food. It can be so frightening to realize, wow, I've done all this work, and yet I need to face down the barrel of the very core of what I don't feel safe about. And that's what was really astonishing to me. I mean, ultimately incredibly liberating. And it's very freeing. Once you jump off the cliff and you go, okay, you know what? I need help. I can't do this. I can't do this on my own. Once you do that, it's incredibly liberating. But, my experiences has often been, I've been dragged kicking and screaming, because it's like, no, everything is actually going pretty well. And as you say, it takes courage, because, it can be frightening. It can be frightening to look straight into those elements of our shadow self, or those elements of, if we feel that particular behavior or addiction, or compulsion, there's a reason that we use those avoidant strategies, over a lifetime, right? Because it's painful. So it can be deeply confronting to go, okay, wow, I haven't looked at this in depth and I need to do it. So I would agree with you. It does take a lot of courage, and it is deeply humbling.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is that sometimes you feel like you're the only one that's ever been through that as well, until you have the courage to talk about it and to get the help. Then you realize that actually you're not the only person, and that actually then helps with the process as well, and I think your recovery.
I could not agree more. And honestly, Meek, that touches on, my ikigai, my real purpose with telling this story and sharing stories is to save and change lives, because I believe that we still need to open up the conversation. We still need to destigmatize mental health issues and addiction. Addiction and eating disorders are still largely misunderstood. And, there still is a conception out there, well, there's lots of information so you can get the help you need. It's actually dealing with something on a much deeper level. It's actually dealing with often very deeply shame-driven behaviors, and that's very tricky to address. And so that's, part of the inspiration, and part of why I wanted to share my story is to do it in a fun and funny way, is to bring people onto the journey, and I think the producers, when we talked about the film, you watch something like maybe A Million Little Pieces or Trainspotting, that goes straight to the deep dark side. That's not how it starts. So I wanted to share about, there's plenty of us, millions of us out there that can put on a good show, that can keep our lives together, on the outside, but feel spiritually dead and be falling apart on the inside, and hence the rise with eating disorders, substance abuse, and self-harm. I think we have to open up the conversation if we're going to strip away the secrecy and the shame and the stigma around it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I really want to touch on the film because I'm really excited to hear about this, but we'll just take a break and hear from our sponsors. Welcome back, everybody. So, Alice, your book On the Way to Wonderland is currently in production to be made into a movie. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. So, can you tell us all about this and how did it come about? How did you get this offer for it to become a film?
So, thank you for asking me again. And this is the part that's a bit surreal, because it's something that I've always wanted. And how it came about, it was very organic and divinely guided, as these things often are. I decided to self-publish because I wanted to make sure that I had creative control over the rights, etc. And I sent the book off, actually beautiful illustrations. I've got a shout out to Ondina Montgomery and the and Designs. And Ondina, who did the illustration, so I sent it off to her. My online business manager, Anne Clark, recommended this Designs, sent it off for the illustrations, and it turns out that her husband is a major movie producer. It was so funny because she played it down at the time. She's got this gorgeous sort of Danish accent, and she said, "Oh, my husband does events and things. Can he read your book?" And I'm like, yeah, sure. Turns out, major film producer, Hotel Mumbai, focuses on true stories. And he read the book overnight and he rang me the next day and he said, that you have a movie here. And I'm like, well, wow, I've always wanted to hear that, but that's great to hear. So I started working with him and another producer who's been in the industry a very, very long time. And I have the opportunity to produce the film. I am a producer, part of the production team, which is absolutely amazing. One of the things I love about working with these producers is they're very passionate about the content matter. They feel very strongly that this is the right time to be telling the story, of what can happen through these mental health challenges and addictions, and telling it in a fun and funny way, but with a real message. And we have again very organically attracted some brilliant Australian talent in terms of cast and crew. So we're in the process of getting funding finalized for the script development. And it's been a really highly collaborative process, which has been honestly, it's been a dream come true. It's amazing. What I love about these producers, their philosophy, they're very much, it is going to be focused on, we are looking to have some international talent in the mix. It is a lot of Australian talent. It'll be filmed in Australia. There's a couple of scenes that'll be filmed in New Zealand. What's wonderful though is this collaborative approach means that we have an opportunity to work as a creative team, which is fantastic. And that we're very much focused on telling, these real stories of human triumph and disaster, to share the message of hope and to get the message out there at scale. So it's an exciting process. I have to say, it's definitely teaching me a lesson in it's like getting a black belt in patience, because I am learning in this industry that things will go really quickly and you get some wins on the board, and then it's a case of course, when you're dealing with the best people in the business, they have other projects, and so there's a real choreography that goes with it. And so we are definitely in the process of production, which is very, very exciting. And it takes patience. And the aim is to have the film out for the feature film released by end of next year. But again, there's no guarantees. I'm learning in this industry. It takes time, and we've got to wait for the right people, and things can pivot, as you bring in, new talent into the mix. But it's very, very exciting to be involved in the opportunity. And I do feel like it is the right time to be sharing, these types of stories at scale, because I think people are opening up to it, and it's the right time for people to be hearing that they're certainly not their own on this. So so it's exciting. I wish I could give a set date in terms of theatrical release. We're not there yet, but well on our way in terms of assembling an absolutely brilliant. I'm very, very excited about the Australian cast and crew that we've got involved, and that element of staying detached, I guess, emotionally detached from the story, but still passionate about the cause, is really important at this point in the process. Because what I'm learning, this is my first time, producing a film, And because we're being very collaborative in the creative process, it involves building out a character bible and going deeper into the characters. And of course, we're working through options around, there's obviously different ways that we can present this. So it's very exciting to be going through the process, and it's a process, but it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun being involved in it, and it's really, really enjoying it.
And will you be making a cameo in the movie?
Absolutely. That's the plan. Yeah, that's the plan. So thank you for asking. My husband and I, so my husband is also very central to the story. Chapter 5, Love Actuarially, because he's an actuary. So he's in terms of neurodiversity, he's like the other end of the spectrum. His main addiction is roller coasters. He's a bit of a coaster head. So, interesting that he would be, be attracted to me. I guess that fits. So he's got a very central role as well in this. And look, we are planning to have a cameo. I think we might go with that Alfred Hitchcock thing of being in the first scene and just, So that's the vision. It's so interesting because I have had people say, "Oh, are you playing you?" And it's like, no. I'm getting a professional to play me. I might have a nice romantic notion, but no, we'll get the professionals in the same way that I had a romantic idea about being involved in the script writing. I've actually already started my second book, which is going to pick up from where this one left off. Learned very, very quickly that the art of script writing, it's a very different kind of writing. So I'm very excited that we have some high caliber writers on the team, because it's that's a real process, and that's where we're at the moment, is converting the book into a screenplay. So it's going to be exciting to see how that unfolds.
Wow. And you talked earlier on about not letting your story then become, I think from an energy point of view, you can really, you almost need to detach from your story, I think, at times, so that you're not living it again and again and again. They say never do therapy on stage, because you need to have worked through it and have your story before you then start talking to other people. So I could imagine then having the movie would be a beautiful way of your story being told as well, because it's still your story, but you're detached from it, but it's still got that beautiful feeling.
I love that you've said that, Megan. You've picked up on that, because that is precisely the delicate balance that I need to find with this. And I agree with what you're saying. And I'm a very in terms of the modern mystics that I've studied and the work that I've done with the neuroscience and quantum healing and transformation, etc. I'm 100% with you, and I'm extremely mindful with that and very deliberate and conscious that what I'm finding is working is that I'm treating this is a journal of my life at a point in time. Yeah. So what's helping as we go through the character Bible and the script development is these are characters in a story. So, and it is a story, and it is a real story, and it is a story that I've lived. But I love that you've said that, because that's something I emphasize. And, when I'm working with clients and speaking at treatment centers, etc., I 100% agree with that. And I need to be extremely mindful of that I'm not emotionally hooked into the story. These are facts that happened at a point in time. And I'm very conscious and very deliberate in terms of setting the right intention and meeting that with the right energy and frequency on a daily basis, so that I'm not retelling the story or getting triggered by the trauma. Now, I'd like to say that I've got it perfectly sorted and I've unhooked now and I'll never get triggered. We'll see how it goes, because I think that when it starts to get real, seeing the actors, it's quite surreal I was going through a process with the writer around selecting scenes, the pilot scenes for the film. And I found myself saying, so when I'm in the back of the limo with my mother, and it's like, oh, hang on a second. No, this will be me talking to someone, someone being in the, like, watching myself being played out with these various scenes. So it's an interesting exercise to go through. But as I say, I am happy to say that I'm making progress with unhooking from it. It's a story, characters in the story, respectfully, but making sure that I'm not getting hooked into the emotions, or the trauma or the challenges, that happened at that point in time. So that's That's my practice at the
Right.
moment.
Yeah. And is that just as simple as catching yourself and then just sort of sitting back, observing that you're getting back into it and thinking, okay, having a couple of tools to think, okay, how do I remove myself again from the story and my energy and just viewing it from afar? Is that something that you've learned to do?
It is, and I would say it's still a practice. So I'm always very careful to say that I'm a student with all of these principles and practices, even though I've been studying them for a long, long time with both ancient teachers and modern mystics. It is a practice. I think that absolutely it's developing, cultivating that witness consciousness, that observing ego to notice when if I find myself getting heightened or triggered or emotional about something, recognizing that and then identifying, okay, what do I need to do to go and regulate? So I talk a lot about regulating through my recovery. So what I need to step away. And sometimes it will happen, like it was a number of months ago, and I had a media interview and a journalist asked me a very pointed, specific question about something that happened when I was young. And I didn't even realize, I was off the call. It took a few hours for me. I was in a spin. And I didn't know what it was. And I realized, wow, it was a good learning for me because I went, okay, well, firstly, I need to set boundaries to be really clear that with someone, because I don't need to go into the details about the trauma. I don't need to go there. I'm happy to share background context, how it affected me so that people understand and they can relate to it so that they can hear that I understand the language of their pain. But being very mindful of, okay, I've been triggered, I've been activated by that, I'll step away from it. And we've got some safeguards in place, which is good in terms of the writer getting very familiar, the script writers we're working with getting familiar with the content, my husband being familiar with the content as my co-producer, that if it is getting a little bit intense, just to watch it, step away, and create that space for myself. So I think it's staying vigilant, staying mindful, and being really clear. And I honestly, I have a list of activities I do if I've been triggered or activated, and that's what works for me in my phone on a piece of paper. And it's like, right, who do I need to go and speak to somebody? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to do a yoga pose? Do I need to, do some belly breathing? So all of those techniques, which so great question, because that it is really, really important for me to stay mindful of that as I go through the process.
Yeah. And, I think it's also probably for you too, is that learning not to beat yourself up if something does trigger you, because at the end of the day, we're still human. And at the end of the day, this is stuff that you've experienced. So we can't be completely blank to it, because then you just, I don't know, you become a bit of a cold fish, don't you?
Oh my goddess. And I love that. You've said that and you've touched on that. Because as I say, this is a practice and that's beautiful. A woman a professional that I work with who has extensive experience in terms of recovering from trauma, eating, she's just amazing. And only last week, she was reminding me of that. I realized I was just getting busy and going into overdrive, and when I'm going into hyperdrive and being too compulsive with my activity or my exercise, I can, get a little bit manic. It was really beautiful. Just as you said, she reminded me, hey, you're human. and actually you need to allow for this process and need to allow for the fact that it's never perfect. It's never done. It's an ongoing process. And you might get blindsided one day. You might get triggered by something. So I love that you said that, Megan. I really do, because it is something, it really is a day-to-day proposition. And sometimes it's hour to hour, minute to minute, or breath to breath, So great point.
Mm. And so where are you now with your recovery? What's happening with you at the moment as you go through all of this?
So thank you for checking in on that. And as I say, in the spirit of transparency, I really needed to double down on my recovery earlier this year. So the last 6 months, I'm taking a career break from my corporate space to focus on the film production and the writing, which has made a huge difference to my nervous system, I have to say. Hopefully that's not controversial. I think anybody that's done the hard yards in senior leadership I was in the financial sector. I think anybody would understand that it's been good to give my nervous system a break for sure. I've really, the last 6 months this year, I've really had to come back to a strong spiritual self-care daily practice in terms of making sure that I'm looking after myself, because what I found was when I got really excited about the film deal and everything started to pick up, and that's, as they say, that's a default for me. It's like, yay, things are happening. Let's start moving really quickly. And it's sort of a natural thing. And also understandable because it is exciting. It's truly a lifelong vision coming true, and that's wonderful and that's exciting. So where I'm at is I've really, really come back into focusing, keeping my self-care, regulating through my recovery, working a spiritual program. That's really important to me. And, when I talk about spiritual program, I know that's different for everyone. My truth, what I've come to see is that if I'm not having those really strong daily practices, I generally meditate for 1 to 2 hours a day. I do my yoga, that conscious contact with, I don't know the answer to God. I'm not Albert Einstein, and even Albert Einstein didn't even know, but that plugging into source, plugging into nature, when I'm focusing on, having rigorous practices around that, around my recovery. So I would say that in terms of, it's certainly not my first rodeo with respect to drug and alcohol recovery. It's something I've been in drug and alcohol recovery for a long time. And I did have a lapse with that when the film Dale came through, which again was really, really humbling, but also an incredibly powerful lesson for me in terms of, how important it is not to lose sight of those things. It's also been very helpful to meet a lot of other people in the industry that also, in drug and alcohol recovery, in all sorts of different forms of recovery that also lapse. And to have those people in my sphere of influence. So I connect a lot with people that are on the recovery road. That's really important to me. I have my spiritual, my soul companions that I connect in with on a daily basis. And to me, when I talk about that spiritual program, those grounding practices, self-care, that could be my yoga nidra, my meditation, my prayer, that conscious contact, that staying grounded is so essential. And I see it as more essential each day, because as these big ticket items that I've always wanted are coming into my experience, I've had, as I said, this really humbling, reminder that if I'm not looking after myself and I'm not staying aligned to my spiritual self and my spiritual path, it's easy to get, caught up in the tornado of it and taken off track. So where I'd say I'm at is doubling down, doing all of the suggested things, and and enjoying that. And really, one of the key things I've been reminded of, going back into treatment in January, I would say that this year has been the first time in my life that I've gone as deep as I have in terms of the eating disorder recovery. And I can see now that was one of the ones that I thought, well, we'll just, that I didn't really go deep into that. And I think that's an interesting conversation in and of itself, right? Because I think that disordered eating, being controlling, being regimented about our exercise and food is incredibly socially acceptable. In fact, it's encouraged. So where, if you're prone to extremes, if you're prone to perfectionism, if you're somebody that, has that risk of trauma response, that's a tricky one to find recovery in, I think, because it's a very different approach. With drugs and alcohol, or even with you can kind of put those things down and you can abstain. You can't abstain from eating. You've got to keep going. So, I've really had to learn to prioritize myself and focus on self-care, amidst the mission. That's been really important for me.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. One of the sayings that I often say to myself, if I'm having a bit of a day, or it's okay to feel flat or down for the day, but just don't unpack your bags and stay there. So for me, that kind of
Ah,
gives me the permission that, you know what, it's okay. I feel a bit blur, or I'm going to have a day of on the lounge, but
mhm.
tomorrow I've got to get up and keep going. And so
Yes.
let's don't unpack those bags and stay there forever.
Oh my God, Megan, I love that. That's a beautiful way to put it. And that's the reality, is that we do have that opportunity to reset, and it can
Yeah.
feel hard. It's so easy to lose sight of that when, and energetically, preaching to the preacher here, we both know that you can get into an energy loop and it can feel hard to get
Yeah.
unstuck. This professional that I mentioned, she talks about getting sucked into the quicksand, right? And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
actually, I love the quicksand analogy, because she said, if you do get stuck in quicksand, the best thing to do is to stay still.
Mm.
Actually is not, a bit like if you get
Yeah.
caught in a riptide, fighting against it actually. So I would agree with you. And I love that philosophy, and I love that saying of yours, because that, very often, this day at a time proposition, I mean, that's 100% kept me alive. And it's absolutely kept me focused on my path, and has really helped, day to day, that even if it gets really overwhelming within one day, to remind myself, okay, things are, energy's off, feeling a little bit challenged. But then, can get through that night, have a good sleep, and then reset the intention, tap into a different frequency, and shift my energy the next day. So I love that expression of yours. That's excellent.
Yeah. Thank you. So talking about the film, so what is the mission for the film and Wonderland?
So great question. The mission for the film and Wonderland, the foundation, is to share stories, solutions, and strategies. I mean, the film is going to be focused on the story, of course, to save and change lives. Really, we want to get the message out there at scale that there is no shame in having mental health issues. There is no shame in having an eating disorder. Easier said than done when you're in it, because often these behaviors, they're incredibly shame driven, and often there's that very strong and direct correlation with, shameful experiences and events of trauma, of course. So this is a lot easier said than done. I'm not saying it's as simple as that. The film, it's absolutely sharing that story to get that message out there, that anybody that's suffering with any of those issues, they're definitely not alone. And then Wonderland, the foundation, is the not-for-profit platform that we're establishing to bring together professionals predominantly with lived experience, because I've found that that's what's helped me the most, are self-revealing therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, eating disorder specialists, coaches, intuitive coaches. So I believe in bringing together a diversity of a professional network, many people with lived experience, to share their personal experience, to help destigmatize these mental health conditions and issues, because it's important. I feel it's important as a practitioner, someone who's worked for decades in this space, to be able to put my hand up and say, you know what, I had a lapse, and I was right in it, and I was doing the work, and I had a lapse. It can happen, and there's no shame in that. And in fact, the more we can open up the conversation about that, and have other professionals say, yeah, I've been there, and let's share stories about it. But also, it's about bringing solutions and strategies, onto the platform, and getting it into the mainstream media, and getting that conversation happening. Because we know, certainly Australia, I mean, definitely in America as well, I mean, really worldwide. In Australia, the stats are not good in terms of the, an estimated 500,000 Australians that are suffering and at very high risk with eating disorders, millions that are battling addictions, and other process and behavioral addictions that are debilitating. I mean, gaming and gambling, oh my goddess. I mean, that's a whole other, and that really, it costs lives. People take their lives over, and I understand that as someone who was in the deep, dark rabbit hole of debt. that made me want to take myself out as much as any of the other issues. So the idea is, let's get some stories out there onto the platform. Let's start sharing about some of the experts in this in this field, and let's start talking about some of the different treatment options. So it will be a platform to share. I'm interviewing someone tomorrow who's opened up some treatment centers in Australia, an eating disorder expert, and really getting it out there so that people can start to feel a bit more comfortable, maybe hear something in the story that, that resonates, and I'm realizing that this is impacting my life, and for them to have some options. And I think having options, it's so important, because I think that it can be, you may have, I'm a big advocate of 12-step programs, for example. I'm definitely alive because of them. I know a lot of younger people, the language can be quite dated. It can be quite controversial. Some people think it's, there's mixed emotions and views on that, but there are other options. There are coaches, there are professionals, there are family therapists, which I'm a huge advocate of. There are treatment centers, and there may be people out there that don't realize that there are treatments that they can get access to that will be covered by government rebates and private healthcare. And I think we need to start sharing the news, because often, even in my professional network, I'll share about these various clinics and treatment centers, and even they don't know about it. So it's like, let's get the message out there so that people can start tapping into the coaches, the professionals, the network, the support they need to get well.
Yeah, wonderful. Oh, it's beautiful. Really beautiful, beautiful. So we've really only got a couple of minutes left. Can't believe how quickly the time has gone.
And I was like, yeah, that's gone super quick. I feel like we could keep going for another hour.
I think we could. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I ask of all of my guests before we finish our conversation. So what is your favorite quote, and why is it so important to you?
Oh, I love that you've asked that. And I have to say, when it comes to favorite quotes, it's a tricky one. My book is peppered with quotes, because there's so many quotes that I love. I often quote Ram Dass, which is someone I worked with and I followed. But if I had to choose my favorite, it was actually something that Gandhi said. And the story behind it was that Gandhi had led a salt march against the taxes in India. And he led this march, and then he meditated during the night and the next morning, and he had about 10,000 people following him, on this salt march. And he stood up in the morning and, declared to the crowd that this wasn't the right approach, that he didn't feel this was the right approach. They weren't going to get, the results they needed. And, most of the 10,000 were sort of up in arms and saying, but we've already started this protest. We can't stop. And Gandhi said, I'm not committed to consistency. I'm committed to the truth every day as I see it. And I remember hearing that, and it struck a bass note, in the chord of my heart so deep, so deep. And I love that, because I'm not, I know that, from a building habits perspective, people will talk about consistency, and I get all that, but I'm a really big believer, particularly coming from where I've come from and being someone who's had many turning points, where I've made a clear and conscious decision in a moment to shift my life onto a totally different trajectory. I believe so strongly that it's important to honor, respect, and really act on our truth and speak our truth each day, that, as we see it, versus being consistent. So, that's probably one of my favorite stories. And I felt like when I heard that, what Gandhi had said, it really, it gave me permission. And it's been very much what the course of my life has been like, that, there have been plenty of times where I found myself down, the wrong rabbit hole or down an alleyway that I didn't like. But the truth of it is that we have a choice in each and every moment to look at things differently, to focus on something different, and to change the trajectory. And I never want to underestimate how incredibly powerful that is. I know in my book, when I was, in that deep rabbit hole, I can pinpoint the moment that I was sitting in the QVB having tea with a friend, and it was the next step to tripling my salary within the span of a year, because she just said to me, Alice, if you believe you're only worth that much, that's all you're going to be earning. So I'm a very big believer that when we reset and choose to focus on a new truth, anything becomes possible. We have limitless potentials available to us.
And I think too, if you are being led by that truth, then your energy shifts, so you attract the right things. People look at you differently, because when you're acting from your truth, then you're trustworthy, that you're authentic, that people are drawn to you for those beautiful values.
It's so true. And I would say, Megan, I feel, the more that I'm on this path, the more that I'm on this path, I realize the less I do, the better, in terms of the principle of surrendering to the frequency, setting the intention, aligning to that intention energetically. That's what really makes the change and draws things into our experience. But I get that can be an unpopular option in a very 3D world, where people are like, well, this is, and again, I'd be preaching to the choir here. I know that you would understand these principles deeply, but it's so easy for us to get caught in the here and now. And well, I'm, in this apartment, and this is my reality now, so this is going to be my reality tomorrow. All we need to do, and of course it takes time, the gardens don't grow overnight, but when we plant those seeds of intention, energetically align ourselves with that and meet that with an elevated emotion, anything is possible.
Yeah.
Absolutely anything. Yeah, it's incredible. And yeah, we need to take the action, and we need a plan, and we need to focus on that plan, of course. But I think, I love what you've said there, because that's really true. I think that it's important to remember that we really do get to choose our intention, and the emotion that we want to bring to that every single moment of the day. We have that choice.
Yeah, beautiful. What a beautiful way to end. So, Alice, I want to thank you for sharing your story with us today. I've got no doubt that you are changing so many lives by talking about what you have been through. And I want to thank you for that, because I think it's really important that I share my gratitude to you, that you are on this journey to help others, and I think that that's really beautiful. And I'm really excited about the film production. I can't wait to go to the movies and watch it. I think it's really exciting.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for what you said, me. And equally, I'm exceptionally grateful to have the opportunity to share about my story. It's been a big journey to get to this point of going, okay, yep, I'm going open architecture here, to share openly and honestly. But we have to. I think when I look at the current state of the world, I don't want to be doomed. But if we really want to see that shift in consciousness, we really want to come together as a collective to, connect as a community, to help each other heal. And shift the dial, as a global community. We have to do it one conversation at a time. We really do. So I feel very, very grateful for the opportunity to chat with you today. So thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. I also just want to thank all of our amazing and dedicated listeners and supporters. And I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks again, Alice.
Thank you so much, Megan. So wonderful to be here. Thank you.